Hello, Tim Wilmot here. Welcome to my watercolor demo of a street scene. Forgive the dodgy title, Street Scene Secrets. It's really about what I believe are good things to include in a street scene. So this is my reference photo for this painting. This is a town called Bergerac in southwest France. And from a painting point of view, from a street scene point of view, we've got perspective. So there's a narrow street on the left-hand side going away towards us, a narrow street on the right-hand side, some lines of perspective there going towards the horizon. We've got people, we've got street furniture with lampposts and these bollards. And these bollards are quite nice because they're joining, they're connecting the foreground shadows to the background shadows. That's quite a nice feature to include in a painting. There's some vehicles, cars around the place as well. Maybe this one coming in from the side, I will have to adjust that a little bit, but maybe have a car over here. Yeah, so plenty of figures. Nothing much on the left-hand side here, so I think I'm going to have some figures over here. And there's some utility lines here, telephone lines or whatever. That again is something nice to include in a street scene. Helps with leading the eye into the composition and perspective and so on. Aerials, street lamps there on the side of the house. Nice one, catching a little bit of light there, do you see? As well as light catching the tops of these bollards as well, and people around their heads and shoulders. We've got the pavement lines, so lines of the pavement. That again is going to help us lead our eyes into the composition. A little bit of reflection here, the light bouncing off, probably off that building there. Sun coming from the left, bouncing off that building, coming down to the left-hand side. Other street signs as well. No entry signs, street names and so on. So lots of things that we can include. So let's see how we get on. I'm using Saunders Waterford watercolor paper here today, and this is 300 grams in weight. It's 15 inches by 11 inches, that's quarter imperial size, and it's secured down on a piece of board with some masking tape. The pencil I'm going to be using is a 3B pencil, so quite soft. And I'll chat about my palette when I start painting proper. So, from the left-hand side, that left-hand building, first of all, with a few details on the edge there. And then that narrow street on the left-hand side. Rooftop. And then this sunlit wall in the middle. And I think those angular shadows, they're going to help with this picture as well. Tallish building on the right-hand side. And the street going away from us, and then on the right hand side the border of this building that again at the top is catching a bit of sunlight, just an indication of the foreground shadows, base of the buildings, sort of horizontal. Now, let's get in a car on the right hand side. So that yellow car is not quite right for copying exactly as it is. Maybe not even the color as well. So it needs to be more into the picture, and maybe not sideways on. Just maybe it's a car coming towards us, turning around a corner, and we'll have the windscreen catching the light. So it'll be a nice bit of contrast to the shadow in the background. Figures on the left hand side, starting with the head, shoulders, just roughly drawn. They're going to be coming into the shadows, I think. And a second one. Try and make the legs slightly different to the first one. And then some central figures. Not have them too close to the car. Don't want to make it look as if there's going to be a car accident at any moment. And some of these figures will be painted in whole, others will be partially painted to give maybe a sense of movement, a bit of lost and found. So a few more details on the buildings, just indicating some major lines that I'll be following, and the base of that building, the pavement, and then the street furniture, these bollards, roughly in a line, not too precise. Indication of shadows there for the figures. So I think we're done on the drawing. Now, starting off with my initial wash, I'm picking up some yellow ochre here. So the palette, I've got running from the top, I've got neutral tint, burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, which I'm using now. I've added quite a bit of water to it, so I'm almost taking it right out of that little well there. Below that is Viridian green. Don't often use that. Cobalt green or cobalt turquoise. Cerulean blue, which I'm using now for the sky. Good colour for the sky. Quite intense at the top. Because the sun is coming from the left, the sky is going to be stronger on the right. That's why I'm adding in a good bit of paint over there. Continuing on the palette, cerulean blue, cobalt blue in the middle, then ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, a bright red, I think it's a Windsor red, or cadmium red, which I sometimes use, and then there is light red, cadmium orange, and at the bottom is a lemon yellow. So continuing on with the first wash down into the buildings. So I brought the sky down over the buildings, and now getting a base coat for the buildings, some of which will be now the end thing for the buildings, that are those parts that are catching the sunlight. So as I'm painting in these buildings, you'll notice I'm reaching for different colours, not trying to keep it too uniform. So this colour now will be hopefully the wall as is, catching the sunlight at the top. Then down to the base of the building. Continue on that yellow ochre down onto the road, cool it down a bit with some cerulean blue, then paint it between the figures. Doesn't matter if I go over them, some of their clothing will be catching the light. So let's warm it up a little bit down the bottom right corner. And then a bit cooler on the left hand side because that's in the shade. Mix it up a bit. It's all still quite moist, so I can keep going back into it and changing things, add more colour if I think. So I'm just there at the base of the figures, just painting over their legs, so I'm not leaving any nasty white paper. So let that dry. And now on to, if you like, the third stage. We've done the initial wash, and now we're going in a little bit darker with these buildings, starting off with the street on the left hand side. So I'm trying to get it just about right on the palette, see what it looks like on the paper, and if it sort of looks okay, continue on. Mix in a bit of yellow ochre. Then we need to go a little bit darker towards the base, the bottom of this building. And the bottom, get in the gutter, if you like, of this roof. Quite dark. And now the roof, quite dark again. Bit of blue in it, ultramarine blue there, burnt sienna. Mixing that in a separate little area. See how, when that dries, see how dark it is. Might need to go over it again. Not sure at this stage. Yeah, it looks about right. Now, the wall of this building that's in shade, up to the roof, let it bleed a little bit, doesn't matter. Have a fairly nice straight edge. Don't worry about going over that figure's head. Darker towards the base of the building. And leave a jagged edge down the bottom. There's maybe objects on the ground there, bins or whatever. Now this nice angular shadow, which was one of the things that attracted me to the scene, that angular shadow there, and the shadow, the foreground shadow, sort of mimicking at a similar sort of angle. I thought that was quite nice from a composition point of view. Right, this middle building, and then the shade, the wall in the shade. The brush, or the brushes I'm using, are mainly from a company called Raphael, and they're mop brushes. They're called Soft Aqua, very soft brushes, got a very nice point to them, good water retaining capabilities, and this one I'm using at the moment is I think it's a size 4. So it's kind of middle of their range. Now there's all sorts of colours going on along this street, the buildings along this street. So I'm going to have to keep mixing in different things. I can leave out little bits which might be windows, adding a bit of cerulean there. Bring it on further down, and we will need to go again a bit darker at the base of the building, which is going to give us a nice contrast with the figures and against the lighter car. So this time I'm being a little bit more careful painting around the figures, because some of them will have lighter clothing, so maybe an adult and a child figure there. And then around that one, careful as you do it. So use a bit of neutral tint to darken things up. Could be Payne's grey as well. Similar sort of colour. So that's that street base colour done. Apologies for the glare there. Because of the angle of the light I've got on the camera, that'll go away when it dries. So the shadow going across to the building on the right, leaving the top still in the sun. So I think I took this photo late in the afternoon, so you get good shadows forming on some of these open areas. Slightly smaller brush now, and we'll do a bit of figure work. So starting with their faces, trying to get some sort of skin colour here. And notice that I'm just dabbing a little bit with the face with a small mop brush, and it might bleed a little bit into the background shadows there, which doesn't matter. So some indication of clothing, bit darker on their right hand side, on the right hand side, because the sun is coming from the left. And leave some of the shoulders where it's just catching the light. Try and change the colour of some of the clothing. And then this figure on the right hand side behind the car. Just close up that gap there of the background. Building, right side of the car. And just an indication of some headlights. And then connect that with this figure. Right, so let's get in some shadows now of the bottom of the buildings and some of the figures. Not too dark. Just a little bit of indication of some legs as well. Now the shadow of this car, quite dark, a bit darker shadow than I have for the figures. So we're leaving a little bit of light underneath the car. And then this darker colour is merging in with the colour of the car, which will give a pleasing effect. Now, put a darker head on a figure, didn't quite like it, so I just quickly smudged it out with my finger. You could have lifted it out with a brush, dry brush, or a bit of paper towel. Now, bollards. So I just mixed a sort of thicker yellow ochre mix. Still using this small mop brush. So let that dry a bit. Now with a paper towel, I'm just lifting out bits to give an indication of some reflected light while the paint is still still damp. So now we'll do the left hand side, starting at the top, which is quite dark. And like the buildings before, we're adding in different colours as I come down. Bit of yellow ochre. That's what these old buildings need, is when you look at them, there's all sorts of different colours going on. So it's just going to hopefully give that sort of effect. Bit careful on the edge, that's a little bit too dark. Just lift it off straight away. And halfway down, that little architectural detail jutting out. Darker towards the base with the addition of that neutral tint. This is probably actually one of the darker areas of the painting. And that's the other thing to think about with watercolor, is what are going to be the darker areas of your painting, and what will be the lighter areas, and sometimes have the two together to maximize that feeling of contrast. So the shadows now on the left hand side are a little bit lighter than the building, just letting them bleed in with each other. Help it along by mixing them with the brush. And these shadows, different colours again, will be appearing in here. Join up with that bollard. Mix it on the paper as well. So as we come over to the right hand side, it does need to be a little bit weaker. And I need to think about how to soften the edge of the shadow, which I think I'll just wipe it off actually with a towel. You've got to get in quite quick to do this. So try and make the line of that shadow not too precise, not too neat and tidy. While we're doing the shadows, let's get in the shadows of the bollards there. Now these two main figures on the left hand side, again start off with the faces. So I'm keen to get these done while the foreground shadows are still wet, so I'm going to merge the two together. Now their bodies, a bit darker. Bring it down into those shadows. Smudge it up a little bit with the fingers where I need to merge the two together. Second one. And we'll drop the legs into the shadows again. Just let them bleed together. I'm just going to do a bit of splattering now with some clear water. I've got a smallish synthetic brush, just picked up some clear water and just splatter that into the foreground shadows, and gradually they're making some interesting shapes. Just a bit more. And a bit more on the left hand side. Just lift off a little bit in that shady area where I wanted some reflection to come down from that building behind. So now with this smallish synthetic brush, I'm going to add a bit more detail into the background buildings, into these buildings. Just pick up little bits and pieces here and there. Windows, not all windows, just an indication of some windows. Not too many on this side because I want to keep that quite light. Bit more of a defined line to that gutter and across the roof. So not much water on the brush here, fairly dry, almost dry brush strokes. Perhaps some aerials on the rooftops. I don't know what that is, just making a few lines there. I think there was some kind of a bicycle shed cover, something like that over there. So it's quite dark in that little corner. I'll just smudge it, just merge it a little bit with the fingers. And then get some detail now into the windows down the street, not too many. And maybe some vertical lines just to define where one building ends and another one begins. So that's neutral tint and a bit of burnt umber. There's quite a few dark lines there. And this doorway or whatever, make that quite dark up against that figure. Nice bit of contrast up to the shoulders of that figure, and then a few little details on the rooftops, some aerials maybe. So you notice I left a few little gaps when I did the shade in the narrow streets, so they could be an indication of windows. So I was careful there not to go over those, try and leave those a bit darker towards the bottom. So I'm almost using this brush now like a pen or like a pencil, just making these lines. Maybe a bit of blue there to indicate some shutters, some painted shutters. So I just flatten that brush edge to give me a nice edge. So let's pick up a bit more dark now and add some more details to the building on the left. And I need to get in that line by a line along the curb side where the pavement is, just one line there. Notice it's quite almost like a dry brush stroke, that. And then a bit of shadow on these bollards. Now, what I've got here is a sword brush, a dagger brush, which is very good for doing thin lines, a bit like a rigger brush. Just quickly draw a few lines, not too many. And a bit of lost and found as well with that. And when I've got it, let's add in these lines along the pavement, which just helps lead the eye in and gives a sense of perspective as well. Not too many, bit of lost and found again, gaps in the lines. So a few that way and then a few the other way. And while I've got the brush, just add in a few more bits and pieces around the painting. Could use this for street lights. So picking up this smaller synthetic brush again, let's add in a front grille to the car. Just makes it look a little bit more like a car. bit more convincing. Now this figure on the left, there's quite a gap between his right arm and his body, so I've just imagine he's carrying something there, and then this second figure maybe carrying a bag. So I noticed that was a little bit too dark, so I just smudged it out quickly. That's a bit better, I think. There's a darker window on these, or some darker windows on these middle buildings. You could add some birds in the sky as well if you wanted to. Just continuing to go around the painting, picking up little bits of detail with this smaller brush. Put a darker face on that figure. Maybe a couple of wheels on a car. It's always a good idea for a car to have some wheels. Perhaps some legs on that figure, not sure. So I think we're nearly done. What I normally do at the very end is use some white gouache with a very small brush, or I could have used the dagger brush just to add a few highlights here and there, not too much, just a few, as I'm doing here, tops of people's heads, go along these bollards, particularly where they're up against a darker background. The gouache does dry quite quick on the brush, so I sometimes have to add just a little bit of water to it, almost like the consistency of a thick paste really, and just a tiny bit on that small brush. So it's almost getting to the point of the painting where I'm running out of ideas, so it's a good time to think about stopping. Let's get one bit of highlights on that right hand bollard. So I think we're done. So what I'll do now is I'll pop up the finished picture and just have a sort of recap of street scene secrets, or my 2 cents worth of what to include on a street scene. So think about perspective, leading the eye into the composition. Get some figures in there, add some scale, adds a bit of detail, different size of figures, lost and found. Get in a car or two, always adds a bit more realism to a street scene, some parked cars maybe. Think about the street furniture, bollards, street lights, that sort of thing. Telephone lines, always lead the eye into the composition from side to side. Maybe some pedestrian crossings. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you might have picked up a thing or two, incorporate in your own paintings. I'd welcome any feedback, please. Please leave some comments. If you've got any ideas for future painting subjects, please email me at timothywilmot@gmail.com. Please go to my website if you want to see more stuff up there, timwilmot.com, TIMWILMOT.com. As I say, thanks for watching, and catch up with you on the next video. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.